Amazing. So hello everybody and welcome to another what I hope or what I'm certain will be another amazing webinar run by Lawyers Who Care. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Gemma Creamer. I'm the Deputy CEO at Lawyers Who Care, an organisation which facilitates children or young people, as well as those older as well, access in legal careers. So we foster care experienced talent into legal careers. Our promise to mentees, mentor orgs, and all of those that are kind of connected with us is to run monthly webinars. I think this one may well just be one of my favorites because of the lady that you're going to meet who's running it. So Alex is a executive coach essentially for lawyers, aspiring lawyers, those who are also lawyers already. And I was connected with Alex earlier last year to basically be my coach. And through the sessions that I'd done with her, I realized she is not one to be gate kept, and I must share her with you all because she's just amazing. So I know this webinar is going to be really insightful, really thought provoking. For a lot of you, it's around a topic that a lot of us sometimes don't know how to have, don't even know how to start the conversation on how to have. So Alex is going to teach you how to navigate and handle difficult conversations. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to the one and only Alexandra Conroy.
Oh, thanks so much, Gemma. What a lovely introduction. Hey, everyone. It is really great to be with you all today. I have been looking forward to this and such a great organization, so I'm really pleased to be here. So I guess to give you a bit more background of me, so you know where all of this is coming from. As Gemma said, I work now as an executive coach. I help lawyers and aspiring lawyers with performance, communication, leadership when they get to that point, career progression, all of those things to kind of create and well-being to create a successful and sustainable career. But I started off my life as a lawyer myself. I was an investment funds lawyer, kind of corporate lawyer. And I worked at a big US law firm called Kirkland and Ellis for most of my career. And then towards the end, I made partnership at K&E. And then towards the end, I lateraled across with a team of people to another big New York firm called Fried Frank. And I was with their asset management team. But about 7 years ago, I decided to totally change directions in my career. I stepped out of private practice and I set up my own coaching business. So I went off and I did a master's in the psychology of human behavior. I got certified as a coach. And for the last 7 years, I've been working with hundreds of lawyers. I do a fair bit of work with people who are aspiring lawyers as well and helping them with the application process, but just hundreds of lawyers across London and the US on all of these different topics that I've mentioned. But I absolutely love this topic that we're talking about today, how to have difficult conversations, because it is so relevant to people at every single level, wherever you're at, and even in your personal life. We have to interact with other human beings. And sometimes we can find those conversations to be really tricky or difficult. So hopefully, wherever you are in your career, whether you're, just starting out or whether you're in a leadership management role or wherever you are, hopefully the topic today will be super useful for you. So let's just dive in. And before we do, I'll say the topic today is really about human interaction. So let's have a bit of it in the session itself. Please don't hesitate. I know it's a Zoom function, but there's a chat function and there's a Q&A function. So please feel free to put your comments, ask your questions, stick them in the chat. You can also use the Q&A, and I'll make sure we leave a chunk of time at the end where I'll cover all of the questions in the Q&A. But if I catch them in the chat, I'll try and do them as well. But if you can, we do these webinars and you invest time in them. And this one in particular, because it's about interaction, I really encourage you to try and not multitask, set aside everything else that you're looking at and really try and focus on this so that you can get the most out of it. And I want to start by asking you all, when you saw the title of this session today, what do you view as a, in quotations, difficult conversation? So tell me in the chat, what were you hoping? What type of conversation were you hoping I would cover today? Tell me in the chat. While we're doing that, I'm just going to share my screen.
Yeah, Alex, I just turned my camera off just so you can take center stage.
Thank
Perfect.
you. Okay. Oops. Excuse me. Okay, so we have got a conversation on trauma could be triggering, feedback, which may be negative. That's a very common one that people view as difficult. Anything else? Any other conversations you have in a work context where you think, ugh, that's difficult? Pay, yes. Having conversations about pay, that's a really common one. So here are the things that oh, we've got another one. Any conversation can be difficult for me. I work in children's care, so a lot will be around trauma, choices, safety in general. Yeah. And sometimes asking for what I need. I'm much better at advocating for others than for myself. Yeah. Wow, that is so common. Okay, thanks everyone. So these are some of the common themes that people view as difficult. So that one at the top is a really common one. If you're giving people what we think of as negative performance feedback or perhaps bad news, that can seem a really difficult thing to do. Talking about sensitive topics, admitting to a mistake. This is one sometimes we feel very vulnerable when we're admitting that we've done something wrong. And if we need help or we need support on that, that can feel difficult. Saying no. Does anyone find it really challenging, especially if you're talking to someone in a position of authority, to say no or challenge their perspective? Asking, Gemma, that's what you mentioned, asking for advancement, negotiating salary, that can seem difficult, and setting boundaries. So obviously there are a whole range of different types of conversations, but those are just some of the common ones. And now let me ask you this. Why do you think or why do you view them as difficult? So, again, tell me in the chat, what is it about these types of conversations that makes them seem difficult to you? I know for the negative performance feedback, people will come and say to me, I'm worried about that the other person will be upset, or I'm worried that they will react defensively to what I'm saying. Yeah, the opinions of others and feeling judged, right? A certain topic maybe triggering or something that you may just not want to talk about. People will take things personally, June. Yeah. Feeling exposed. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. And so this is this is this is the most common thing that people struggle with having difficult conversations. It's about the worry of the fear of the other person's reaction. And also, we can fear how we will feel in that situation, feeling exposed, feeling vulnerable, sometimes feeling a bit awkward or uncomfortable. And so that is what's driving us fearing these conversations. We worry that they might be upset, annoyed, frustrated, defensive, dismissive, all of these different things. We spend a lot of time worrying about how we will feel and how the other person will feel and react in that situation. And this was definitely the case for me. So when I started out as a junior and mid-level lawyer, I really just tried to avoid what I thought of as difficult conversations at all costs. I would just try not to have them, basically. And I think a large part of that is I was raised to really care what other people thought of me and to really be mindful of their negative opinions of me and trying to avoid those at all costs. And then when I got into the legal industry, that kind of felt even more relevant to me because, especially with people more senior, I really worried about their opinions of me. I didn't want them to be annoyed with me. I didn't want them to be frustrated with me or have a bad opinion of me. And then even when I was managing other people, I wanted them to like me too. So I basically wanted everyone to like me. I didn't want to upset anyone. I didn't want anyone to be annoyed with me. And so I basically just avoided these conversations or had them in a really weird or awkward way and sort of tiptoed around the point. I remember I was managing an associate once, and he was terrible at meeting deadlines. And he would miss the deadline, and I would just let it go and not talk about it. And then he would miss another one, and I would let it go and not talk about it. And finally, we were doing this massive, big closing, a sort of £1 billion closing, and we were coming up to the closing deadline. And he again had missed a deadline. And I just could not get the words out, the words that would say, hey, we agreed that you would get this to me at 4 o'clock. It's late. Where is the document? What's happening? And I just couldn't say those words. And instead, I remember I said something like, how's it going with the document? Do you mind giving me an update? And I thought that he would basically mind read me and understand that I was feeling slightly irritated and that he would just magically send me everything. But instead, he just gave me an update on where he was with the document. He just said, "Oh, it's yeah, great. Thanks for following up. It's coming in an hour's time." And it was really at that point that I realized this is starting to impact my work and what I'm ultimately trying to achieve. My fear of having these conversations is meaning that I have no influence on people and I'm creating bad work products. So that's when I really started to dig into what is it that is stopping me from having these conversations. I've just got a comment here. He probably said that he did not know how to tell you it was not complete. Yes. Yeah. And he didn't have to tell me that the document wasn't complete because I wasn't direct with him. So it meant that I caused an even bigger problem. So the point I want to make here, before I get into the sort of practicalities of how to have these conversations, is people will come to me in coaching and they'll say, Alex, what do I say in this situation or that situation? And it is useful if we can have some kind of idea of what to say, some kind of script. Maybe that gives us some confidence going into the conversation. But having a script is only a tiny proportion of the reason that we don't do this. The main reason that we don't have these conversations or do them well is because everything we've just been talking about our fears of other people's reactions and how we will respond in the situation. So the main takeaway for this and so many other things in relation to human interaction and influence and all of these things are 95% of mastering these types of things is about how we learn to manage ourselves. And by that, I mean learn to manage the way that we are thinking and feeling about the situation. Because we can't have a script for every single conversation we might possibly have in our lives. Maybe you can get that from ChatGPT now, but you can't carry around a script with you all day and say, hey, wait a minute, here, let me just refer to page 75 of my script. These conversations have to come more organically than that, and we can't be afraid of them and we can't tiptoe around them. So the main thing I want to talk about today, in addition to practical stuff, is how do we set ourselves up for success by making sure we've got a clean mindset going into these conversations. Because the main problem I come across with people is they're avoiding the conversations because they feel too uncomfortable, or they're tiptoeing around the point because being direct feels uncomfortable, or we just talk at people because we're so desperate for the conversation to be over that we don't actually have a two-way conversation. We're not present in the moment because we're so wrapped up in our own fears. Or, and this is pretty common, we end up having a two-way defensive conversation because we'll say something and they'll respond and we will respond defensively to what they've said. And now you've just got two people both feeling defensive, having an unproductive conversation. So regardless of the script and what you say, it's how we enter these conversations that is the most important thing. Okay, so I'm going to give you a few rules of thumb about having these conversations. And the first one is, as I said, the most important, we have to manage our own mind first. And I want to give you a little framework. So this is just a basic cognitive behavioral model. It's just really a description of how we work as human beings. And by the way, you can use this model for anything you're trying to achieve in your life, any goal or anything that you're struggling with, because it just describes how we work as human beings. So, starting on the left-hand side, we have brains that are just constantly taking in tons of data from the world around us through all of our senses. And your brain is interpreting that data. It is deciding whether it's dangerous or not, what it means for you, and it is making assessments. And I've called those all thoughts here for these purposes, just to simplify things. So by thought, I just mean any opinion that you have, any judgment that you have about someone, any prediction that you make about the future, any kind of assessment. That's what I've called a thought, and it's just a sentence that runs through your brain. And then all of our thoughts generate our emotions, and our emotions drive our behavioral responses. So however you're behaving at any point is driven by this model. So let's say I notice right now that there's a lion in the side, it coming in through my door. Now, before I've noticed it, I won't be having any response whatsoever because my brain won't know it's there. But as soon as I see it, my brain will be making a very quick assessment, something along the lines, I imagine, of, oh my God, this is very dangerous, Alex. You need to do something immediately. And that thought will be creating the emotion of fear. And all that means is I'll have some adrenaline going through my blood and my heart will be pumping and I'll be feeling tense. That's what an emotion is. It's just physical sensations in our body that we give a label to. And those emotions will be driving my behavior. So you would probably see me running for the hills or having a fight with the with the lion, probably very unsuccessfully. So that is just an example of how we work. And this is going on all of the time. You know, thousands and thousands of times a day. You have thousands of thoughts, some of them very conscious, some of them less so. And this is driving your behavior. So if you want to change your behavior, including how you show up in these types of conversations, you have to be aware and have a mind to the source, i.e., what you're thinking about. So let me give some examples in the context of difficult conversations. Some common thoughts that people have is, firstly, this is a difficult conversation. That is a assessment, a judgment that you're making. Some people might have a totally different assessment and think that the conversation is totally fine or enjoyable or nothing worrying about it. But if your assessment, if your thought is this is going to be a difficult conversation, then that will be creating some flavor of fear. Like, I'm not saying it'll be outright panic, but maybe just apprehension or nervousness. And that will be leading to you delaying, catastrophizing about it, tiptoeing around the topic, and that type of thing. And I've given some other examples of thoughts here. I don't want to upset them. That was such a common one for me if I was giving tough feedback or having a conversation perhaps about a sensitive topic. I really didn't want the other person to be upset. And my focus on that meant that I was very apprehensive and I maybe wasn't as clear as I needed to be with them, which didn't really do them any favors because it means that they didn't get the feedback that they needed to get. I worried that I would annoy people, and that again made me apprehensive. Or some people will have the thought, I'm so bad at this, I'm so awkward. And then because we're thinking that in the room when we're having the discussion, we're not present with anyone. We're just in our own minds thinking, oh my God, this isn't going very well. Are they upset? What are they thinking of me? And all of those thoughts are just meaning that we're distracted, we're feeling self-conscious, and we're not present with the person in the moment. So you can see how what we're thinking about consciously or less consciously is going to have a direct implication in whether we have the conversation in the first place and how we have it. And then, of course, ultimately the influence that we have on the other person. So this is a really important, you can apply this to anything in your life. I know some of you may be thinking, yeah, this is common sense, Alex, but I think it's really important to remember this because sometimes we're just going through our lives and believing everything that our brain sends our way, and it is creating our results in our life. So it's really important to be conscious of this. I'm going to bring myself off screen share just for a second so that I can talk to you face to face. If anyone has any questions on that in the chat, then please do put them in. But I wanted to give you a couple of things just to think about on this point. It's really important to understand with this model a couple of things. The first thing is you have thousands and thousands of thoughts every day, and you're lawyers or budding lawyers, so you probably have even more than the normal person. And the really important thing to remember is your thoughts are not the truth. That is not how human brains work. And as lawyers, I know we think we're very rational, or budding lawyers, we're very rational, and that's true. We tend to have good prefrontal cortexes that where we can do rational executive thinking. But that part of your brain is not running the show most of the time. And it's really important to remember that just because you think it doesn't mean that it is truth. In fact, most of the thoughts that we have every day are not factual in any way. So let me give you an example. If you looked out the window this morning and saw the weather, your brain didn't say to you, oh, it's 86% cloud cover today. Your brain said to you something like, oh, what a beautiful day, or oh, what a horrible day, or oh, I was just on holiday last week where it was back-to-back sunshine, so this isn't that great. You're making constant interpretations. And it's very important to understand that. So if you're having a thought about a conversation or about the other person in the conversation, how they might react, how you might feel, what the consequence of that might be, just understand that that is not truth. That is just your interpretation of the situation. And the reason that that's important is because as human beings, we have the ability to choose what we think and to change our perspective. And that was fundamental for me when I realized I really need to sort this out. I really need to stop avoiding these conversations. I decided to think about them in a totally different way. So in the feedback examples, I started to really think, why is it important to me to have these conversations? And it was important because I needed to get my work product done and I wanted to do well and it will cause me problems. But actually, as a manager, it was also important to me because I wasn't serving the other person if I didn't have the conversation, right? I was actually putting their job and performance at risk by not giving them the feedback that they needed to have to excel in their career or to keep their job or to progress. And so I think it's really helpful when you're thinking about, okay, how do I change the way that I'm thinking about this so I can feel more motivated to have the conversation, more calm or have even more courage to have the conversation. A really useful tool is to think, why are you bothering having it in the first place? If you can't think of a reason, then don't have the conversation. But usually there is a good reason. It's in service to you or in service to them in some way. And that was a really useful tool for me. So have a think about what are you thinking now and how can you change your perspective in order to make you feel more calm or motivated or confident in having that conversation. Just going to check the Q&A to make sure there are no questions. No, okay. So let me bring myself back. Okay. So these are just some exercises. Remember why it's important. Think about how think about the conversation in a way that serves you. And actually, this last point is a super important point. Remember, ultimately, in all your conversations and dealings with any other human beings, you cannot control them. You cannot control their reaction. So this was actually really valuable for me to remember. I can decide how I want to show up in the conversation. I can decide that I want to have it I want to be clear. I want to be kind. I want to be respectful. I want to be direct. But even with the best will in the world, I don't control someone else's reaction. And that was extremely helpful to me because it stopped me holding on so tight to wanting them to respond in a particular way. At the end of the day, just like me, their feelings and behavior are driven by their own thoughts, which have been created over their whole lifetime because we all have different circumstances in life, right? We are all offered different circumstances. We all have different experiences, different socializations. And so everyone's reaction to a situation will be unique to them. And of course, you can be thoughtful about that and in terms of the way that you approach the conversation. But as long as you've done that, you don't control their reaction. And so if it's important for you to have the conversation, it usually will lower the pressure and frustration if you can remember, as long as I'm going into it in a way that aligns with my values. And for me, that generally meant respect, kindness, and thoughtfulness. As long as I'm doing it from that perspective, then at the end of the day, I can't control another adult's reaction to what we discuss. Okay, so that's number one, and that is the most important one because it impacts everything else. Every single other question you ask me about how to approach different circumstances or how to avoid this and that, the answer will start from what is running through your mind at the time. What is driving your current fear or the current way that you're dealing with it. And if you can unblock that, then you're all smart people. You can figure out the words to say. But here are some other general things that I found helpful over the years. Okay, so this one is set aside time. If you're having an important conversation with someone, set aside some specific time for it, right? Don't just tag it on to the end of something else. So I remember when I had I was really struggling with burnout at work and I really needed some support and some help, but I was afraid to have the conversation. I viewed it as really difficult because I didn't want them to think I couldn't handle it. I didn't want them to think I wasn't up to it, up to the job. And so I really struggled with raising it. And so instead of setting some time aside with them where I could talk about it, I remember I just tagged it on to the end of some meeting about a client matter and just said, hey, by the way, blah, 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 blah. And of course, they weren't prepared for that conversation. They didn't react in a way that was particularly helpful to me. And that was a real lesson to me. If you want to talk to someone about something specific that is important to you, set aside time to do that. Don't try and just tag it on to something. And again, this comes back to the point about managing your mind. The only reason I did that and didn't just set aside a time in the diary and say, hey, I need to speak to you about something important. Do you have 20 minutes at the end of the day to chat with me? The reason I didn't do that is because of fear. I didn't really want to have the conversation with them. So again, that's why the first point is so important. So set aside time. The next one is, and you guys can tell me what you think about this, drop the pleasantries and tell people what to expect. So what I often find is that when people are having tough conversations, they will start out with small talk. Hey, how are you? What's going on? How are you finding work? And that, of course, is a natural human thing to do. But if you are having a tough conversation, then it can really take you off track. So it can really mean that you lose control of the conversation. You either end up talking about something else, and so you don't get to the thing that you really need to talk about. Or let's say in a feedback situation, you might say, how are you finding it? And the response you might get is, yeah, it's great. I'm loving it. I feel like I'm doing so well and I'm so successful. I'm really pleased. And then, of course, you have to backtrack from there, which is much harder. So my advice is, of course, how are you? Sit down, whatever. But don't get distracted and waylaid by pleasantries. Tell them what to expect. And what I mean by that is, if you've got some bad news for people, tell them up front, hey, I've got some bad news for you today. That gives them mentally some time to prepare and you're not just hitting them with it. If you have some feedback to give them, say to them, hey, I've got some feedback to give you today on whatever and how you can do better next time. Again, that gives them some time to prepare and then you can enter the conversation. I need to tell you about a mistake I've made. This one is a big one. Have any of you ever made a mistake or done something wrong and you're trying to have a conversation with it about it and you're just tiptoeing around the point? My advice to people is, again, if you're feeling afraid or apprehensive, just right at the beginning, say, get to the point, tell them what you want to talk about. I've made a mistake. I remember once I made a really big mistake at work and I really did not want to have the conversation, but I knew I had to because they would find out sooner or later. And I remember really having to manage my mind and generate some courage by reminding myself why it was so important. And so I took a deep breath and I went into their room and my boss was doing something else and smiling. And I thought it would be so easy here for me to just not get to the point and tiptoe around it. So I just took a deep breath and said, I need to tell you about something that I've done at work, a big mistake that I've made. And that meant that then I had to have the conversation because I just put it out there up front. And the last one, yeah, I need to ask for some support. So again, if you get into a conversation and you need support, put that up front. That means you then have to have the conversation. Okay. Frame with positive acknowledgement or intent. So this is just a way really of setting up the conversation to lower people's defensiveness, if that might be an issue, and explain to people why you're having it. So if I was giving someone some tough feedback, I'd say, hey, I've got some feedback that I've got to give you today on whatever. But before I got into that, I will want to start off, that's what I mean by frame. I want to start off the conversation by saying something positive to them so that they're not feeling defensive. Because remember, the whole point of the conversation is not for just me to read my feedback to them. You don't get a gold star just for saying the words. This comes back to the script point. If I just read off some feedback to people, that is not job done. The purpose of that conversation is to influence their behavior and help them improve their performance. And so with that in mind, I have to be thoughtful about how do I influence that conversation. And if someone is going to be extremely defensive or extremely anxious about whatever topic you're talking to them about, then it is smart to be mindful of how do I lower that defensiveness from the outset? How do I create as much as possible? Remember, we can't control them, but how do I create an environment in that conversation where they are not feeling like they've got their guard up? And so when I would be saying to someone, hey, giving them some tough feedback, I'd firstly be saying something like, hey, the reason I'm having this conversation with you is because I value you as a member of the team. I really appreciate the way that you have done these things, and I'm wanting to give you this feedback because I want you to succeed. I would say something along those lines, and then I would give them the feedback. But that then mind then isn't consumed with, oh my God, she's about to fire me. This means I'm a terrible lawyer. All of those things that high achieving people can sometimes think. I've taken that out of the equation by saying, this is the reason why I'm doing it. It's in service to you. So I've just put some suggestions here up on the screen. Obviously, use your language. Words will be context specific and you have to use your voice. But the point is, think about the purpose of the conversation and what you are trying, the end result you are trying to create, and how you need to therefore frame it to make sure that they are ready to have that conversation and that they are open to it. Does anyone have any questions on that? We can come to some at the end as well. And I'm happy to brainstorm with you ways in which you do that, but it really is context specific and it's just about being thoughtful before you go in. And so thinking, how might this person react? And how do I try and influence that from the way I frame the conversation? Okay. The next point is super important, which is once you've done all of that, so you've managed your mind, so you're feeling, um, you're not going in anticipating that it's going to be awful. Hopefully, you are feeling slightly calmer, you're feeling slightly grounded, you know why you're going into the conversation, you've set aside a good time for it, you're not distracted on small talk and pleasantries. You've told them what you'll be talking about. You've framed the conversation with some positive acknowledgement or explain why you're having it. The next point, and this is where people can really get off track, is get to the point. Okay? Don't tiptoe around it. Don't, don't like go off on some other tangent over there. Just get to the point. What is it that you are trying to communicate to them? And I say this, and obviously this will be dependent on how you normally approach things. But if you tend to not like difficult conversations, then what usually happens is people are not clear because they are afraid of what they're saying, because they're afraid of people's reaction. And so in the moment, they're trying not to say it. They're trying not to quite, like in that conversation with me and the associate, I really wanted to say, why have you missed this deadline? But instead, I said, how are you? Can you give me an update on the document? And so that tends to be what people do. They say something that is vague or is not quite to the point, and the other person may therefore totally miss the point, and we've got nowhere. And I see this happen a lot in review meetings and in conversations in firms. People are tiptoeing around things and people leave confused. In my one-to-one coaching practice, I talk a lot to people after they've come out of review meetings so that we can see how their performance is, what they need to work on. And I cannot tell you how many times people will come to me after the review meeting and say, I don't really understand what I'm supposed to do. I don't really understand the feedback that they gave me. I don't understand the point that they were making. They come out totally confused by the whole conversation. And we then have to spend an hour of their time in a coaching session trying to figure it out, trying to guess at what the feedback was. So maybe the super common one, which I come across all the time, is they're told, hey, you need to be more confident. And they come to me and they say, well, I sort of thought I was confident, and now they've said I'm not confident, but they didn't tell me what exactly that meant. And so maybe I need to change my whole personality, and I have no idea how to do that. So that like it's just really vague feedback that serves no purpose whatsoever other than to make someone feel less confident at the end of the review, as opposed to someone saying, this is what I would like you to do differently. We need you to speak up more in group meetings because you have valuable things to say. We need you to work more independently and stop running every email past your supervisor. We need you to speak up more on client calls. Those are really concrete, specific examples that are actionable and people understand what you mean. So get to the point and stay away from any kind of vague descriptions or things that people won't be able to understand. What are the facts? Don't talk about feelings because everyone interprets them in a different way. What are the facts? Give concrete examples and get to the point as quickly as you can. We've got a comment here, so I'm just going to read it from Steph. I'm a bit blind. Let me just put on my glasses. As the person on the receiving end of the feedback, someone tiptoeing around just adds to the anxiety as you start to catastrophize, so it's counterproductive. If your aim is to avoid causing the other person distress. Steph, I couldn't agree with you more. That is exactly my point. when you are tiptoe around it, that is for your benefit. That is driven by your discomfort. Again, that's why it's so important to manage our own minds first. We don't want to feel uncomfortable because of what our brains are making it mean. And the end result is we don't communicate what we needed to communicate. And that can result in the other person being confused or, as you say, catastrophizing. Very common in lawyers. Okay, because that's what happens when people come to me after reviews. They do not come and say to me, I didn't really know what they meant, but I guess it must mean I'm doing really well. I guess it must mean I'm just excellent. That is not what the human brain does, especially the lawyer, perfectionist human brain. We will immediately go to an assumption of the negative generally, because that's how brains work. We have a negativity bias. It's quite functional, it's intended to keep us safe, but your brain will lean towards a negative interpretation of something if the meaning isn't clear. And so, yeah, if you're having a conversation and you're not being clear, then it is extremely likely that the other person will interpret that in a negative way. They will look for the negative in it. Even when I was giving performance reviews and I was very explicit with people about what they have done well, sometimes even at the end, I knew that their brain would still be focused on the negative. But if you only talk about the negative, or if you're not clear about things, then that will not definitely, but that will very likely happen. So yeah, I don't know if any of you know the work of Brené Brown, but one of her main things is clear is kind. I think I may have put it on here. This is such an important point, and this was really good for me in terms of building my courage, because the way that I changed my thought process was, Alex, you may find this uncomfortable, you may be afraid, you may be worried about people's reaction, you may feel awkward in this situation. But if you do not communicate what you need to communicate during this conversation, you are not being kind to that other person. And kindness, especially in these high pressure environments, was something that I really valued. That doesn't mean I'm not going to be direct with people. But at the end of the day, most people in these careers want to succeed. They tend to be ambitious people. They want to do well. And so giving people feedback to progress, or, for whatever reason you're having a conversation with someone, if you're doing it to help them, in service of them, to try and change their behavior in a way that will be good for them, then it is not in service to them if you are not clear. So this is a mantra that that really helped me build the courage to have these types of conversations. Let me know in the chat if you struggle with this, if you tiptoe around things, or if you worry about how to say things, and so it ends up being a bit vague, or any other examples where you think you are not just getting to the point and being direct about things. And then the last rule of thumb I've got here is to actively listen and get curious. This is a really big thing that I teach as part of the leadership skills that I teach people. Sometimes, if we're thinking that conversations are difficult, we have this tendency to just want to get in and get out as quickly as possible, because the whole thing just feels a bit worrying and a bit awkward. And so we just want to leave as soon as possible. And what that means is we don't actually have a conversation with people, a two-way conversation. And so we may have been direct and said what we need to say, but our influence is still fairly limited because we haven't had a back and forth with them. And so when you want to have a conversation, think about the fact that there needs to be a conversation part of that equation, not just you reading off a script. And so a few tips I have for that. So you've gone into the conversation, you've got to the point, you have said your bit, and then it's not just time to leave. Ask people about how they are taking it. Find out in the room what is going on for them. So what do you think about what I just said? How do you feel about what I've just said? What's your take on this? If you're holding someone to account, let's say they have missed a deadline, like the example I gave at the beginning, I would say to them, hey, I thought we agreed that you would get it to me at this time. What happened? And I said it genuinely with curiosity. Or why do you think that you did this or you didn't do this? And the reason it is useful to have these open, so you notice none of these are closed questions. So none of these are just trying to elicit a yes or no response. You're trying to get information from the other person because the more information that you can get about why the thing happened or what is going on for them in that moment, the more help you will be able to be in terms of solving the problem for them. So often, when I became more skilled at this, when I got more senior and I was less afraid of having a conversation with them because I was managing my mind, not so worried about would they say this, would they react this way, it allowed me to be genuinely curious with people. And so if someone is missing deadlines or not performing well, I genuinely want to know why. Because I'm going to assume it's not that they're stupid and I'm going to assume it's not that they don't care. So something else is going on there. And what I would often find is that maybe their workload is out of control and they are just really overwhelmed and they don't know how to cope. Maybe someone else asked them to do something and they didn't know how to say no to that person. Maybe something is going on in their personal life that is really distracting them. And so once I knew that, then I've got much more information to help them solve for it. I can tell them about how they can manage their time better. I can give them some suggestions about how they push back on other people. Or I can say to them, hey, next time that happens, just come to me. Just communicate and we can figure it out together. If something is going on their personal life, then maybe I can do something to help move things around, or I can at least give them some leeway because I know what's going on. So without asking these questions and having the actual conversation part, you really limit your ability to influence their behavior. I've got some questions here. Okay, Louisa, I agree. It's not what you say, it's how you say it. I have learned to take different approaches depending on the person and scenario. Yeah, that is such an important point. And this gets back to my point, Louisa, that it's no use just having a script because we're dealing with human dynamics here and everybody is different. And so, a script for one person, if I was dealing with someone who was quite blasé and didn't really care, a script for them is going to be totally different from me giving feedback to someone who I know is really anxious and really cares and will really worry about the feedback that I give them. I'm going to approach that situation in a totally different way in terms of what I say, my body language, the tone of my voice, and everything. And that is high level influence, right? Being able to adapt the way that you approach conversations and interactions, having a mind to this is emotional intelligence, essentially, having a mind to how the other person might. Remember, we don't know for sure because we're not mind readers, but how they might respond to that situation. But the only way you can do that is if you manage your mind first, because none of the high level emotional intelligence, strategic thinking is going on when we're wrapped up in our own drama, our own fear and interpretations. That's why people who have a lot of things going on in their brain and haven't really learned how to manage that or process that can really struggle to influence other people because they are not thinking strategically in the way that you're suggesting, Louisa, because they just can't. They don't have the capacity. And that was me for so many years. I was so wrapped up in my own fears and insecurities. I had so much imposter syndrome and I really worried what everyone thought about me the whole time. I just didn't have the capacity to be strategic in how I dealt with it. And so it wasn't until I really started to learn how to manage those and build my confidence and become more secure and grounded in myself and manage my mind essentially, which is a lot of the work that I do with my clients. Then with that sort of foundation, then I had much more influence on other people and could come at these types of conversations much more strategically because I then suddenly had the capacity to think about them as opposed to just being totally in my own mind and my own brain. So yeah, that's such a great point. Okay, another comment here. What comes to mind when you say being clear is being kind really, of being clear is being kind really resonates with me as a neurodivergent individual. When someone hints or is indirect or being socially polite or going around the houses, it doesn't translate for me. I appreciate directness. I may not always be able to use my initiative, and that can be misconstrued, but it's truly frustrating for me just as equally because I feel they were not clear with me in the first instance. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, absolutely. And I think sometimes people view clear and directness as being unkind. Does anyone feel that way? I think sometimes that's why we tiptoe around it. We think, I don't want to be too direct because that is unkind in some way. But if your message is important, and it will serve them at the end of the day if they understand it, then it is kind to be clear. So sometimes I don't know whether maybe it's British politeness where we don't want it seen as bad somehow to be direct. And of course, if you're being direct and you're also being disrespectful or you're saying things that are, not appropriate, then yeah, that is not kind. But if you are coming at it with a good intention from a calm, grounded, respectful place with that person's interests at the forefront, then directness is kind. And you can deliver a tough message with kindness if you're really thinking about your intention. So, yeah, that's such a great point. Um, Ren, with most people, it depends on who I'm having a difficult conversation with, but it's more me telling people to get to the point because it makes me nervous if they're just beating around the bush. Yeah. I mean, yeah, same here. If I'm receiving feedback, and especially in my imposter syndrome days where I was basically on the high alert for any kind of evidence that I wasn't good enough. And so as soon as someone even wrote me an email saying, hey, let's have a chat, my mind was, going red flags. My mind was suddenly creating a whole situation that ended up with me being fired in my brain. Nothing had actually happened yet. I just received an email. But I will be going into that conversation looking for the bad. So if anyone said anything vague, I'm just like on tenterhooks waiting for them to drop the bombshell about how the terrible thing that I did and how I've screwed up and they finally realized that I'm not good enough. So if you're working with someone who was like me back in the day, then absolutely get to the point, be clear, and perhaps frame the conversation with, you're not about to get fired. Thanks for your contribution. Um, Feelings Buried Alive, Never Die is a good book I read on how feelings manifest. Oh, sorry, the comments just jumped on how feelings manifest into diseases and how emotions affect our physical health. Taught me a lot about dealing with emotions presently rather than later, as they also affect when we don't address things. Yeah, I mean, look, this is obviously like a really big topic, and the message that I'm trying to get across today is to start to be aware of what is going on in your brain and how it is making you feel and how that is showing up in terms of how you behave, and in this context, how you have or don't have these types of conversations. Awareness is the start of any change. Now, when I'm working with clients, we are thinking about those types of things and we're thinking in more detail about how do we process these emotions? How do we change the way that we're thinking, especially if these are really ingrained things? But the starting point is always be aware of your brain. Don't just be reactive to your brain. Have a think about what is it offering to you. Everyone's brain is different, but what is it offering to you? How is that making me feel? And what is that creating for me? And even just having that awareness is huge. For me, that was the first step because I just wasn't aware. I was just believing everything. And then the second step was understanding that brains don't tell the truth. Therefore I had some agency over what I chose to think about particular situations. I will say it's not always possible, especially if things are ingrained, to stop thoughts coming your way. But once you're aware of them, then we can have a little bit more control of maybe taking a different perspective in the ways that I've suggested, thinking about how is this in service to the other person. And so that is a lot of the work that I do with people. And so, yeah, any reading on that, I love book recommendations, but it always starts with awareness. Yeah, there's a comment here. People are not used to directness, perhaps. I think you might be right because, again, maybe it's the British politeness thing. Um, I actually, as I said, the firm that I was in was a US firm, and I learned fairly early on that they were fairly direct. There wasn't so much tiptoeing around the points. That was actually excellent training for me because it made me really it didn't allow me to indulge so much in not being direct or interpreting other people's directness. I used to get emails from my boss just saying, please deal, that kind of thing. And I'm not saying that that is a good management style at all, but I really had to question what am I interpreting this directness as? What am I making it mean? And is it possible that they just want me to deal with this thing and that they're not annoyed with me? So yeah, if people are not used to directness, then there is a chance that they may interpret it in a certain way. Gemma, how do you, as someone who can be sensitive to criticism, not take it personally, coming from someone being direct? Yeah, this is such a good point because I'm sort of coming at this from the perspective of someone initiating the conversation, but you're absolutely right. We're also 50% of the time going to be the person who is receiving, who is being talked, who is, the receipt, the can't get my words out today, the recipient of the conversation. And so we have to be thinking about it from both perspectives. And it comes back to exactly the same thing. The number one point about managing ourselves first. This is a really common when I'm working with people on confidence in their career. It is extremely common for people to take things and feedback personally. Because especially for high achievers, we really care about doing well and what we're trying to achieve. So that is already in the mix in our thoughts. I really care about the results I'm creating. And we sometimes, so for example, for me, when I was a junior, I had this sort of insecurity because I was thinking that I wasn't really good enough and didn't belong, and everyone else was smarter and more confident than me. And I really felt like a bit of a fish out of water. So that was the sort of lens, if you like, through which my brain saw the world. And so if someone said, hey, thanks for this document, there were 5 mistakes, my even if they just said it in that direct way, my interpretation would be, oh my gosh, I shouldn't have made those mistakes. That means I'm not good enough. They think I'm an idiot for doing that. They think I'm not good enough. And that is me taking it personally and internalizing that and making it mean something way more than it did. And that sort of fed my self-doubt and my anxiousness at work. So it wasn't the comment, it was my lens and the way that I was interpreting it. And so, yeah, really important to understand that. And if you're giving the feedback, then being direct and not making things mean something dramatic. So never say you made 5 mistakes and I'm so disappointed in you, or I think this means that you're never going to be a successful lawyer. That is terrible management. Just get to the point, but as the recipient, then really work hard on taking it personally is an interpretation that is optional. Drafting errors could just mean drafting errors. the way that I talk about this when I'm trying to help people build their confidence at work is that any performance feedback that you get is just neutral. It's just math, right? A drafting error is a drafting error. It doesn't mean you're not smart enough. It doesn't mean you're not good enough. There's just a reason that you made the drafting error, right? And the reason will be you were tired, you were distracted, you didn't have the knowledge to do it any differently. You were trying to do two things at the same time. It's just going to be something really boring that you can then think about fixing if you want to next time. And so it's being really a little disciplined with our brain and noticing when we're making something mean something outside of just, oh yeah, I could improve this next time. And I understand that sometimes that is easier said than done. But again, it's about awareness. The next time you receive some performance feedback and you notice yourself feeling terrible about it, just ask yourself, what am I making that mean about me? Why is the fact that I missed that point or I made that mistake, why is that so terrible? Could it just be that I missed that point and I made that mistake because I'm just a regular human being like everyone else? So that's such a great question. Thanks, Gemma. Um, okay, I always say to my team, if you don't agree with something you have done or said, I will pull you aside and have a chat with you about it. And I expect the same. We're all human. We're not going to get it right, but together we can talk about it and brainstorm what works, what doesn't work, and how we can improve. No beating around the bush, just clear, honest chats. Yeah, I mean, that is fantastic. And what that does is creates an environment where people are not afraid of bringing mistakes to you or talking about things. So that's when we talk about creating a sort of a safe environment in the workplace, that this is exactly it. And you know, if when someone brings you a mistake, you blow your top, then people are not going to want to bring mistakes to you. Whereas if you are very clear with people, hey, mistakes can be solved, we're all humans, let's talk about things when things go wrong, then you are setting the container to be able to have those conversations. It's such a great point, actually, because let's say you're dealing with someone who takes things personally. One conversation is unlikely to make a huge difference either way. But if over the course of your interactions with them, you are creating that environment where their comments are welcome, where you don't blow your top and freak out every time they make a mistake, where you are consistently acknowledging and pointing out their value and what they're doing well, then it is less likely that when you point out, hey, you could do this thing better, it is less likely that they will have a negative reaction because you have created a container where they are not thinking that that one thing means that they're terrible. So yeah, that's a really important point. Whenever I'm talking to people about giving feedback, I'm saying it's not about the individual feedback, it's how you interact with people on a day-to-day basis. It's just natural, right? If you're working with someone and you know that every time you ask them a question, they roll their eyes, or every time you raise a point, they say, no, that's wrong in front of everyone, guess what? You're less likely to ask questions and talk about mistakes. So, if you want an environment that encourages creativity and honesty and discussion, then that's the container you need to set. And I will say here, because sometimes I get pushback on that from lawyers. They say things like, it's not my job to make people feel better, And I just think, do you know what a leader is? As a leader, you're trying to lead people, you're trying to influence people, usually for the benefit of the business, right? So they can be productive and have good morale and be motivated and create good work product and work well together as a team. So a huge chunk of your job, if you're managing anyone, delegating to anyone, is trying to influence them. And if you accept that, then you have to think, how do I best influence people? And that's where creating environment, being conscious about this exact type of thing comes in. It's not that we're just trying to make everyone feel better, it's that we're trying to create a better business result. And so it just doesn't make sense to me when people say, I'm not giving this positive acknowledgement because they should just be able to make themselves feel good. My response is always, okay, that's great. You can have that attitude if you want, but don't be surprised if you get worse business results than other people or people leave your team. Um, Okay, here we go. I think it needs skill to give feedback that clearly frames the problem in an action or behavior rather than in the individual. Yes, exactly. I struggle with taking constructive feedback personally, but try to remember the person giving it may not be that skilled in phrasing it. And if needs to reframe it to locate the problem outside of myself in something I can work on rather than internalize. Yeah, I mean, what a great way to be managing your own mind there. That's exactly it. But the interesting thing about law firms is that people become more senior when they're great technical lawyers, but they don't sign up to be managers or leaders. That sort of just comes with the job. And what that often means is they're not trained on it. I certainly wasn't. And they maybe don't even naturally have the emotion and intelligence or the skill to do all of this. Um, and so, yeah, they may be bad at giving feedback. That doesn't mean that they don't have things that are worth you listening to in terms of performance, right? Like I said, if someone says you're not confident enough, maybe they've got some really valuable, as you say, Steph, behavioral things that they can say. Hey, I would like you to start doing this and to stop doing that. So sometimes it's a case of drilling down. Can you give me an example? Would you mind telling me a bit more about how you would like me to be showing up differently? I would love to work on this. Can you tell me exactly what I'm doing that is that you think I could change? Right. So sometimes we have to sort of manage upwards and understand that, yeah, people are not perfect at that level, at every level. They may not have the skill to give good, concrete, direct feedback. And so we may need to do a bit of the work on that. So instead of taking it personally, let's just get curious. What exactly do you mean? What exactly do I need to do different? That is the information that we want to know. Such a good point. Okay, yeah, imposter syndrome is crippling, and I do believe for the most part it's meant in good faith, but sometimes it feels very possible that someone does not like you or thinks you don't belong there. It is a confusing experience. Yeah, I mean, I just did a post on LinkedIn today, actually, which was kind of getting to this point. I work with a lot of women in the legal industry, and men and women have imposter syndrome. It's quite prevalent in high achievers, I guess, because we really want to get to the next level, so our brain is more on the alert for things that might go wrong. Um, but often I will say to women, it's not weird that your brain is suggesting to you that you don't belong. When you look at the top of your firm or the legal industry and you don't see yourself reflected there, of course, this could be for women or other people with marginalized identities. If you don't see yourself there, and so the sort of norms in terms of communication or leadership or whatever it might be, values, priorities are not reflected, then it makes total sense that your brain might say to you, hey, what's going on here? Do we belong? Are we safe here? Like that is a reasonable worry for your brain to have. And so I think the first thing when I'm helping people with imposter syndrome is to understand there is a reason why your brain likes to point out that you don't belong in a group. It thinks you're not safe. And so we don't want to think we're going mad or we're going crazy. You're not broken. Your brain is just being functional. And from there, we can then choose to think, hey, I may be different from some of the people at the top, but I belong here. I provide economic value. I have got these skill sets and these strengths. And even though I don't look like everyone else or I don't communicate like everyone else, I can belong in this environment. And so then you can sort of reframe the way that you're thinking, but not if you're thinking that you're broken in some way. So I get your point here that it can be a confusing experience. And so the first thing is just to understand your brain. When I'm working with people who have imposter syndrome, I'm always asking them, why do you think your brain is saying that to you? And it's usually trying to protect you in some way. And when you can understand that, then you have much more ability to manage it. You can sort of parent your brain a bit. Because remember, we're not our brain. And so you can say, hey, actually, I know things are a bit different. I know someone may actually not like me, because that's a thing. You're right. Sometimes people don't like us. Um, but it's still okay. We're safe. We can keep working, keep providing value. And that, so then you can sort of have a conversation with your brain to help you feel more safe. So yeah, that's a really good point. Imposter syndrome is one of those things, and it's relevant to this because if you have imposter syndrome, it's going to impact how you receive or show up to these conversations. But it's one of those things where you really have to be able to see what's going on in your mind very clearly, and you really have to know it's not truth, right? In the sense that it's just an interpretation. It's understandable why it has that interpretation, but you then get to choose something else if you want to. Of course, you don't have to. I just want to finish off this slide before we wrap up with a few questions, just because this was the last one, just to say, once you've asked people questions so that you can having that two-way conversation, we need to actually listen to their response, actively listen. Most conversations that you have with friends and family and people, that they usually, there's been some research on this, and it's something like people will speak for about 5 seconds. It's something very short. I can't remember exactly. And then while they're speaking, we will already be thinking of our response. So they'll be saying something and we'll be thinking, oh, this is what I want to say next. And then we interject and then they interject. And that is like a normal, casual conversation that we have with people. But in a work context, especially if you're stepping into a leadership role or you want to create influence in whatever conversation you're having, it's really important to learn the skill. And it sounds silly because you think, I know how to listen, Alex, but the skill of listening in a conversation. Next time you have a conversation with a family member or a friend, try this out. Notice your desire to jump in and share your perspective and stop yourself and just listen to them and ask them questions. And what you'll notice is they'll have an amazing experience. They'll feel really heard. They'll be able to talk about things that maybe they wouldn't have otherwise if you had kept jumping in. And so especially in a work context, this is a really important skill. If you don't actually hear and listen to what they're saying, then you won't have so much information in terms of how to influence them, and they won't feel heard. And that is super important. And this, if you're really getting skilled at this, the next level of that is to acknowledge them. Yes, I understand why you feel that. It makes sense that you feel that way. It's normal to feel that way. If you're listening to someone and then acknowledging their feelings, then they will start to feel safer. Because basically what you're telling them is your emotional experience is okay. It's normal. You're allowed. You're human. We're all human. We all have emotions. You're allowed to feel them. And so that it really creates kind of trust in that relationship. To be clear, that doesn't mean you have to agree with them, right? If someone says they don't, that they're feeling really stressed because they don't think they're good enough and they're really worried about something, you can say, yeah, it makes sense that you feel that way. In a high pressure environment where you really care about your job, it makes sense that you feel like a lot of pressure and that you might be thinking that you're not good enough. And here's all of the value that you create. Here's how I think we can solve that problem. So I think sometimes people don't want to do this because they're worried that people will say something and they'll have to agree with them. People maybe will make excuses or blame other people or be defensive. And then what do we do? And the answer is you just listen to them, you ask them questions, you acknowledge the way that they're feeling, and then you go back to what you were saying, or you provide them with guidance and advice based on what they've told you. You're not forced to agree with them or to let things go. The point of the listening is to allow them to be heard and to gather more information so that you can help influence the outcome. And then the last point is, yeah, if you've actually listened to someone and you understand the issue, then you're much more likely to be able to give them the benefit of your experience, right? You can guide them, you can give them some advice. Yeah, so this is just that there's power in letting people speak. That's a conversation, right? Let them speak, hear what they have to say. So we've got just under 10 minutes for more questions. I'm just going to leave these up here for 2 seconds in case any of you want to connect with me. These are just some QR codes. You can connect with me on LinkedIn. And I also do have a little cheat sheet just a one pager with some of the things that I've talked about today. If you want just a quick reminder and some useful phrases in terms of what to say, then that's a QR code for you to access that. And in the meantime, please put any other questions or comments in the chat box. I'll just leave these up for 2 minutes and then I'll bring us back on screen. So take pictures of those if you want to now. And of course, you can always just email us and I can send you the cheat sheet if that's easier. Right, I'm going to stop sharing now. Countdown, 3, 2, 1, gone.
Ah, Alex, that was absolutely brilliant. Yeah, that was absolutely amazing. Please, if anyone does have any questions for Alex, make the most of her being on this call now and do just fire away any questions that you may have. I think we've got a few comments.
You're
Thank you so
welcome.
much. This has been incredibly helpful. Oh, brilliant. Yeah, amazing. I echo what everyone's saying in the chat, Alex. Thank you so much from on behalf of Lawyers Who Care. Thank you so much for taking the time to come out and run this webinar in your own free time. It doesn't go unnoticed and unrecognized. So thank you so much for that. And I'm sure everyone got so much value from this call, as do I from the numerous calls we've had. So much so that we're now continuing our relationship, which I'm really excited about. So yeah, please do connect with Alex, guys. I will send out an email following this webinar with all her socials, as well as email for you guys to contact her on. But if there aren't any other questions, then we can wrap it up there. Everyone's just saying thank you very much, Alex.
Thanks, everyone. It was a real pleasure to be here. What an amazing organization you have. So it's a privilege to talk to you all. And I would love to connect with some of you online if you want to connect with me on LinkedIn.
Amazing. Oh, everyone's just putting comments.
You're welcome. Yes, I love that. Look forward to continuing the conversation. Let's keep
That's
talking. Difficult or not, let's keep talking. Yeah. Love that.
All right then. Well, thank you ever so much, everybody. Sorry, politely put, I think you guys, I've never used this Zoom function. This is very new for me, Alex. So I don't know how we actually end the webinar.
I will just end it at my end. So I will say goodbye to
Amazing.
everyone and yeah, let's keep
Thank you
let's
so
keep
much, Alex.
talking. Bye
Thank
everyone.
you.